Okay, next topic in Unit 3 is called the Phillips curve. A guy named Phillips, he did some studies in the 70s, and he saw that there was a relationship, an X and Y axis, between the rate of inflation and the unemployment rate. And what he noticed was during a recession, unemployment was up and inflation was down. And during inflation, it was the opposite. Unemployment was low and inflation was high. So, in the short run, this is not an ADAS curve. This is inflation unemployment. Don't forget. You notice that inflation high, unemployment low, right? Inflation low, unemployment high. And so we have what's called a short run Phillips curve. Okay? So that's what your short run Phillips curve looks like. So anytime you see a point, well, that's where we currently are in the economy. Remember, the unemployment rate is connected to the GDP. It's not the GDP. But we know that when GDP is up, unemployment is down. When GDP is down, unemployment is up. Well, this is just connecting to the inflation rate. Okay? So it helps to look at the side-by-side graphs of your ADAS graph, right? Aggregate demand, short-run aggregate supply, real GDP, and right next to a Phillips curve graph because they are mirrors of each other, as you're going to see. And so why is the Phillips curve important? Well, the truth is, it's not really working anymore. So people have kind of poo-pooed the idea of the Phillips curve, but it's still on the AP exam, so it is important to know, to understand how the ways of thinking work of economists. But, so for right now, we're at A. Okay, notice there's no long run here. That's here for a reason. So this is our current output and price level. Well, if I were to take a ruler, and I would try to find that same spot A over here, that's where we are in that graph. Okay, I haven't drawn the curve yet. Well, let's say that in the short run, aggregate demand increases. Aggregate demand shifts to the right, AD1 to AD2. And now we have B. Well, where would that be on this graph? Try it. One thing we know for sure is that it's going to be above A. How do I know that? Because the price level and the inflation rate are going to move in the same direction. So we know it's going to be above A. The tricky part is, where is it left or right of A? Well, if this is output and this is unemployment, these move in opposite directions. When output is up, unemployment is down. So if you're moving up and to the right, if aggregate demand is moving up and to the right, that means A is moving up and not to the right, but up and to the left. So B is actually over here. Let's say instead of AD shifting to the right, let's say AD happened to shift to the left. Well, what happens then? AD3. Well, we'll call this point C. Where is that going to be? You probably figured it out by now. Down and not to the left, like over here, but down and to the right. What you've done unknowingly, if you're following along here, is you've created a short-run Phillips curve. Okay? Short-run Phillips curve. The other thing you might have noticed is that when aggregate demand shifts, there's going to be a movement along the short-run Phillips curve. When aggregate demand shifts, there's going to be a movement along the short-run Phillips curve. So that is super important to remember. You're not going to remember this in a couple of months, in May, all right? So make sure you write it down. Okay. What about now, instead of aggregate demand shifting in the short run, or aggregate demand doesn't have a short run, but just when aggregate demand shifts, what happens when the SRAS shifts? Well, the easiest way to do it is to follow your point. So let's have an increase first. Let's say that short-run aggregate supply increases to the right. There's been a positive supply shock to the right, 1 and 2. So now we have B. We see an increase in GDP, right? And we see a drop in prices. So we've gone down here. So that means we're going to go down and not to the right, but down and to the left. So really, we're going to be down and to the left over here. Here is B. That's quite different than what happened before. Okay? So what has really happened? Well, in this particular case, the short-run aggregate supply has shifted to the left, the SRPC2. But what about if SRAS shifts to the right, to the left? If it decreases, okay, SRAS, this would be 3, 1, 2, 3. Now we'll have point C. Well, let's go back to A. We started at A. Now we're up and to the left, so it means we're going to be up and to the right. Here's going to be our C. So what's happened? Well, the SRPC in the short run, that was terrible. The SRPC has shifted to the right in the short run. So what's the rule? Well, before we learned when AD shifts, there's a movement along the curve. But when SRAS shifts, there's going to be a shift. Okay, so that's a rule. When SRAS shifts, so does the SRPC. All right? Hope you understand that. What we should do is ask what happens in the long run, the LR. So now I put my long run graph in, and there happens to be a long run Phillips curve graph. Where do you think it is? Well, let's start at long run. So this will be my point A. So I'll put my point A here. And then I'll put my SRPC, short run Phillips curve. Now I'll put my long run Phillips curve, about the same place, the LRPC. And then down here, what do you think I put down here? Well, what's the unemployment rate in the long run? The unemployment rate is about 4.5% to 6%, or you could just put the NRU. Does that make sense? All right. So quantity at full employment is the NRU. So these things are mirrors of each other. So what happens now if we go into a recessionary gap? What happens if there is a drop in consumer spending? Well, I know you know what happens here, so I'll label that point B. Okay. Here's my AD2, a drop in consumer spending. We've shifted to the left. I now have point B, right? Okay, so what happened over here? Well, point B goes down, right, and to the left. So this is going to go down and the opposite to the right. So here's my point B. There's only been a movement along the curve because AD shifted. Now what happens if the government implements a fiscal policy? They increase government purchases. Well, then AD goes back from B to A, and this point goes from back to B to A. Done. What if the government does nothing? There's no fiscal policy and no monetary policy, and they just go with what do? We go with the classical theory of economics, which means that workers will accept lower wages. And then what happens? Input costs go down, and now the SRAS will shift back to the right and bring us back to full employment. Except now the price level has gone down even further. So PL1 to 2 to 3, PL, and now my output goes back from where it was, right, back to QF. So what happens over here? Well, now the SRAS has shifted to the right. So what happens when SRAS shifts to the right? Well, if SRAS shifts to the right, the SRPC must shift to the left. And that's what happens. We go from A to B to C, and the SRPC 1 and 2 looks like so. Arrow left. Okay? So we've just gone from equilibrium, long run, to a recession, showed the points on both graphs, and then, given the information that there was no fiscal monetary policy, we went with the classical model, which means that because of workers accepting lower wages, input costs go down, and the SRPC shifts to the right on that graph, and the SRAS shifts to the right on this graph. This is our point C. That's our point C. We've gone from A to B and then to C. You don't have to put those arrows, but just trying to show you. All right, hope you understand that. There's stagflation, and I say I want to show the stagflation in the graph. Let's say we started at equilibrium. So I'm going to start at equilibrium here. AD, SRAS, Q at F. I'm going to put P, price level C. And now I'm going to do the same thing for over here. I'm going to put A just to show my point. Now we'll say, all right, my A is about over here. We're starting at equilibrium. I'll do my SRPC, C1 and LRPC. That's how you should draw it. So we're starting out okay. Everything makes sense. I can put the NRU down here. I think I got all my labels. So now what if there's stagflation? The price, oil gets destroyed around the world. Oil reserves get destroyed and the input costs for everything go up. So stagflation means SRAS, there's a negative supply shock. SRAS goes to the right. This goes to the left here. I'm sorry, to the left. And now we have price level going up, inflation occurring, and overall output is declining, which means unemployment must be increasing as prices go up. So what's going to happen? What's our graph going to look like? Hopefully you got it. Our point B is going to be up and to the left, should be up and to the right. B should be over here, which means we have an increase in the short run Phillips curve. And so sometimes students, they do this, they do up to here, but they forget something. They label, they tick mark, they don't tick mark over there. Please tick mark over here. Or I should have done it the first couple of times. So make sure you put inflation rate INF, and then you can put a percentage, and then you could do your second one. So inflation rate 2, show a little arrow, and then you can show unemployment rate going up as a result. So unemployment rate 1, quantity of unemployment, you could say. All right, and there you go. There's how you show stagflation on both graphs. Well, let's see if you can draw an inflationary gap with both of these. So I'll do the one we know first. Should be pretty simple for you by now. Remember, the long run is going to be to the left. We're showing an inflationary gap. I've got my quantity full and my quantity 1 and my price level current. So how do I do that over here? Well, I'm going to label A here just to show. Now I want to show an inflationary gap. So we're going to assume that our previous one was down here, right? So if I'll make this B for now, and I'll call this one A. So I go down there, I'm going to make my A. That's going to be where my long run PC will go through, my natural rate of unemployment, and then long run Phillips curve. And now I'll put my short run Phillips curve. It's a little low, but that's okay. And now what has happened? What happened to my B? Well, A is here. We went up and to the right, so therefore we have to go up and to the left. So here's what happened. Okay. That's what happens. I would like to draw a little arrow this way, or arrow down here. Looks better. Yeah, come in. Okay, sorry about that. So we've showed an inflationary gap, what it looks like. Went from A to B. And just for fun, what happens in the long run? If the government does no fiscal policy and no monetary policy, you got to look at that old SRAS. So if prices are up, workers are going to demand higher wages, and don't forget this part, input costs are going to go up. But eventually, SRAS will shift back to the left to full employment. This is 1, this is 2, and now price level has gone up to here. So first we started at PL1, then we started at PL2, and this is now PL3. I did miss the same mistake. I should have done inflation 1, inflation 2. And now what happens? The SRAS has shifted. So if the SRAS shifts over here, then the SRPC will shift back over here, and this will put us at about C. Actually, I should have done it a lot higher. It should be up there. So I'll try to make it look consistent. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it's all the way up here. It looks like SRPC 1 and 2. And this is our new inflation rate 3. All right. So just to recap, inflationary gap showed at A and then to B. And then there was a movement on the curve, so we're assuming AD shifted. And then in the long run, the SRAS shifted left because workers demanded higher wages. And the SRPC is going to shift to the right. So notice, right? SRAS shifts left, SRPC shifts right. Okay, I hope you got it, and I'll try to give you some more practice problems.